Hello, everybody. My name is Ann McDermott, and I just want to welcome you to the Empire Station Coalition webinar in relationship to what's going on around the Penn Station area and the plans that the governor has to basically destroy a huge swath of that part of Midtown and rebuild it. And so we have some phenomenal speakers for you tonight who I think you'll really enjoy. We are a coalition of 13 civic organizations who are just really concerned about what's going on in that neighborhood. And we welcome your participation and your action. And we encourage you to join us in the activities that we're going to tell you about, especially getting a hold of the politicians and such. So, as I said, we have some phenomenal speakers, and we're going to start off with Lynn Ellsworth, who is the chairman of Human Scale New York City and my friend. So let me just hand it over to Lynn, and we just really appreciate your participation tonight. Hang around, the question and answer are going to be at the end. Okay, thanks.
I'm Lynn Ellsworth with the Alliance for a Human Scale City. I'm also coordinator of the Empire Station Coalition along with Sam Turvey. I just have a few comments. In this project, we are faced with one of the larger challenges we city residents have ever confronted. There are, in fact, two competing visions for how to develop New York City. The first one I'll mention is the vision of the future of New York as a hyper-dense city bristling with tall glass towers wherever we can put them. That vision is held by economist Edward Glazer, Mayor de Blasio, Bloomberg, Vicky Bean, Alicia Glenn, Goldman Sachs, the Partnership for New York, the Real Estate Board of New York, and Vornado, the city's largest real estate investment trust. It's a vision of hyperdensity where we residents are but sardines. The model is Shanghai, Dubai, La Défense, Hudson Yards. It's a mere corporate agglomeration, not a vision of a real city. It's a vision that benefits investors and big real estate, which is the only group capable of amassing the vast amount of money that it takes to build out the city in that towerized way. These people are lobbying hard for their vision. They pay millions into the campaign funds of politicians. That buys them access to policy circles we can only imagine. They pay millions to lobbyists and to law firms to promote their position. They hire every chief of staff and senior staffer who has ever worked for government in a never-ending revolving door that cements real estate power and influence. They buy massive amounts of advertising. They own their own press, from The Real Deal to The Commercial Observer to YIMBY.com. They even support a museum of skyscrapers, and they finance the research of real estate think tanks and academia. They swagger into the big law firms as the richest and most powerful clients. They hire lobbyists by the bucketful. They have taken over the boards of most of the large business improvement districts of our city. With this influence, they determine who is on the boards of any regulatory agency that has to do with real estate, from the Landmarks Commission to the Empire State Development Corporation that is proposing the current project on the table. They don't care a whit about what makes cities great. They see the city as a mine to exploit, to overharvest that mine until there is nothing left. They are like the great hordes of locusts that descend on farmers' fields and eat everything in sight. They are destroyers. But the other vision is that of a human-scaled city. It's the competing vision. It's the one filled with great urbanity, a great street life, great architecture, a city with a kinetic and visual connection to our history. It's a city that we want to live in and pass on to our children, not merely endure for the sake of our careers. It's a city where we residents are citizens, not merely serfs paying obeisance to our real estate masters. It is our polis. It is the city that Jane Jacobs wrote about, and writers like Alfred Kazan, Joseph Mitchell, and Michael Sorkin celebrated. It's the New York that once showed the world what is so wonderful about living together in a great dense city, the wonder city that we once were. But this is the city that's being incrementally demolished by big real estate, and it's being replaced by a glass place that is everywhere and nowhere with nothing unique about it. That human scale city has been under relentless attack. This latest project of Vornado to demolish a huge chunk of our city, a great brick Gotham section of it, is just one more blow. but we have sustained too many similar blows against the human scaled city. If we want that back, if we want a human scale vision of our future, we are going to have to fight for it. I urge every person here to stand up and fight. Get on the phone tomorrow and call every politician who says they want to be governor. Kathy Hochul, Tish James, Tom Suozzi, Jumaane Williams, whoever is running. Tell them to kill this terrible project of Vornado to build yet another Hudson Yards. Tell them to champion Rethink's idea for a regional unified train network with a new above-ground Penn Station. That's the better idea, the cheaper idea, and the less destructive idea. Thank you. And we turn now to Roberta Gratz, who you have all read in the past. Thank you.
So just a word of introduction. Roberta is an award-winning journalist who started writing about preservation in the old New York Post, pre-Rupert Murdoch, and has written 6 books on urban development, including We're Still Here, You Bastards, How the People of New Orleans Rebuilt Their City, and The Battle for Gotham, New York in the Shadow of Robert Moses and Jane Jacobs. So welcome, Roberta.
It's good to be here. Some of what I have to say may surprise a lot of you. But first, I want to congratulate all of you for so many of you coming together in this fight. The more groups, the more individuals that sign on, the bigger the impact will be. Second, no one has been a more active preservationist longer than me. My credentials are well known, and the number of landmark buildings on this site is frightening. Brad and Lynn have done a great job, as you will see, documenting this. But the truth is, historic preservation will not win this fight. We are long past the day that preservation could ever win a fight in a battle on this scale. The only thing that would get the larger cities' attention if you could shout from the rooftops how many jobs, small businesses, residents, and individual buildings will be lost. A while ago, I offered a number of you to help fundraise to get a full-fledged, old-fashioned survey done, the kind the Planning Commission used to do in the old days, even when they ignored the findings. I offered this to a number of the groups involved, and no one was interested until you switch your message, not to ignore preservation, but to emphasize jobs, small businesses, etc. Your audience will not expand. That is the message the governor must hear. Third, and most important, the only way to win this fight is to demand the removal of the entire plan and an effort to start from scratch with the public at the table. This plan was obviously devised primarily, if not entirely, by Vornado. It must be eliminated entirely before any of you are willing to offer an alternative or even amendments. By being willing to address the details of the plan, you are being counted as being heard. Only by total opposition can you point to the lack of public involvement. I learned this lesson from the master, Jane Jacobs. She led 3 enormous battles: the Lower Manhattan Expressway, the road through Washington Square, and the West Village Urban Renewal Plan. Remember, her opponents were Robert Moses and David Rockefeller. In each case, victory was the result. Coincidentally, I was recently editing some tape conversation I had with Jane. Most of the conversation was about Westway for a cover story that I wrote for New York Magazine in 1978. based on that interview. It was the first time anyone of her stature had spoken out. Her words helped enlarge the public opposition to Westway, since before that, all the press was for Westway, and they never budged, just like now. I would like to read to you what she said relevant to this fight. I just happened to be reading this over last weekend, and I said, oh my God, let me read it. So Jane saying, actually, in these fights, both the Expressway and Westway, there are people who would like to have New York turn into a Los Angeles. Just replace the idea of the highway and the Los Angeles with the idea of a massive second Hudson Yards around Penn Station. Or are like Robert Moses. And there are plenty of people like this. There is no use, we found out in these fights, trying to convince these people. You fight them. You've got plenty of people on your side. Most people in New York don't want a city like that, either because of the direct harm it does to their home, or where they work, or the air they breathe, or whatever, but also because of the inhumanness of that sort of environment. It just fills them with horror and repels them. No, the way you fight, and maybe the way you write articles, which she was addressing to me, is the way, is taking those people as your constituency. And if you explain to those people, this is what we found out, what it has to do with the city they love, the city they would like to see, then by God, they fight for it. But if you spend all your time trying to persuade the people who really want this instead of fighting, you lose. That means the governor and everybody else. This is the way you get defeated. You have to fight Robert Moses and his successors. You can never bring them over to your side. You could spend all that energy on trying to bring reason to Robert Moses or the governor, showing him how he was harming the city, and you would waste it all because his idea of improving the city is really to wipe it out and start over with big projects. It's a little like Ed Logue, who told me quite sincerely years ago that the best thing that could happen to San Francisco would be another fire, like the one in 1906. Quote, then what a fine city you could make on that site, he said. You never could convince anybody like that. You don't bother, you fight them. And when you, and when you ask me about a question about, but there are lots of people who would really like to see it this way, they are not the ones you write to, Roberta, and try to convince. There are a lot of people who wouldn't like to see it this way, and you explain to them what it will do and what it's all about. I think that summarizes my feelings about this. I have said on many occasions, and I think this was true in the Soho fight as well, you can't engage in a way that lets them count you as having been listened to. I've seen this so many times at the Landmarks Commission. The opposition says, well, we're opposed, but, or we're for, but. The buts never get in, and you are counted as having testified, having been listened to, and having been ignored. And that is it. I'm happy to take questions or challenges, but that's the essence of my remarks, and I'm still willing to help get a survey made that really shows what is being destroyed besides all the landmark quality buildings that we're learning about. Thank you.
Roberta, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate your historical perspective and interactions with Jane and Robert and all the people who, gone before. So we're going to do the Q&A at the end. If you can hang on. Next speaker we have is Brad Vogel from the City Club of New York, who is an attorney who's currently, I know, fighting the Gowanus fight. One of many fights. There's so many fights all over the city, but take it away, Brad. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. I am going to start my video here and get myself spotlighted, if I can do that. One moment. All right, let me just jump right in. The topic here is, I respect what Roberta had to say this evening, but I would also respectfully say that it is eminently necessary that we count the costs of the historic resources that would be lost if this plan is accomplished. And so tonight I would just like to point out that the goose is not yet cooked. These are some legal considerations and additional analysis that I do think we need to keep in mind as we consider the proposed Empire Station or Penn area complex. And I should note that this presentation does not, in fact, constitute legal advice. Next slide, please. I would just like to take a few minutes here to run through a few of the considerations under federal law, some of it preservation law, some of it other law, that does relate to the historic resources in the footprint of this proposed complex. And I think it's crucial that we remember this, because this is not just me saying this. This is just not me, not the coalition saying this. It is also very clear in the environmental impact statement by the Empire State Development Corporation itself that some of these federal provisions will likely come into play. And why is that key? They are relevant because, as far as we can understand, there will be federal transportation dollars used in this, raising this up to the federal level, even though this is an end run around city law, around the usual ULURP process that would attend a massive development along the scope and scale of this project. Yes, it's a state authority that is being used to maneuver this around the usual laws, but federal law does still come into play. And I think it's important to point that out. If you could go to the next slide, please. Because there are some laws that they have not yet, to our to any evidence that I've seen, actually begun the processes required under 3 different federal laws that may well be applicable here. First and foremost, Section 106. This is the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. And we have a federal undertaking here, if there's federal transportation dollars involved. And there will certainly be adverse effects on historic resources. And there is a consultation process that's required. And that process, while it is not a very strong process, it has been used in places like New Orleans to actually require specific mitigations or minimizations of damage. But again, we have seen evidence that demolition is underway inside the Hotel Pennsylvania, for example, but Section 106 consultation, to my knowledge, has not been initiated. So this is a real problem. And I am just here to say that this federal provision and several others are under active consideration by several of the groups monitoring this project. Next slide, please. NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act of 1970. This also goes into adverse effects. And when you start to look at the massive, massive effects to the waste that will occur if this project goes through in terms of the embodied carbon and embodied energy in these buildings, we need to think about that. And so, again, this is another policy that is anticipated in the environmental impact statement that has yet to be fully processed and reviewed. So I mention all of these provisions because I think some people out there think that this is a done deal, but I want to say yet again, the goose is not yet cooked. There are still some places where people need to get engaged and need to be involved as consulting parties in some cases, and remind the federal government that they have responsibilities here. Next slide, please. Section 4F. Now, this is the interesting thing, because we anticipate that the federal funding involved here is coming from the United States Department of Transportation. That is very likely a potential trigger for a provision that actually has a bit more teeth than the other two I just mentioned, and that is Section 4F. And so when you have things like buildings that are eligible for the state or national register of historic places, and we absolutely have a few of those in the footprint site, including the Hotel Pennsylvania, and a number of the buildings in that square between 30th and 31st and 7th and 8th. Those are buildings that have to be dealt with. They cannot just be dismissed. And Section 4F actually gives advocates in the community more teeth than you have under something like Section 106. So again, I point this out because all of us on this call tonight need to remain vigilant and remind, the powers that be, and especially people at the city level who may say this is a state issue, this is outside our hands. Remind them that there are these federal provisions that they, acting for us, need to be cognizant of and need to demand that they in fact are complied with. Next slide, please. All right, two other things I want to talk about tonight. One of them is density. Now, there are claims that these skyscrapers that would be constructed under the plan are here because of density, and we need density, and we need density near transportation. Well, I want to point out, if you could go to the next slide, please, that there is oftentimes a myth that as long as a building is new, it equals density somehow magically. Well, in many cases, sheer density alone does not necessarily mean that it is the type of density we're thinking. Sometimes a building is built bigger, but actually has fewer people in it, or is in fact less dense within its own envelope than a historic building. And we have many buildings in this complex, some of them that are not recognized as being particularly national or state register eligible importance, but they nevertheless are very dense and eminently used buildings that have great benefit to our city, that provide spaces for small businesses. We have density already on this site. So this claim that the new clear cutting of the site is going to give us density is in some cases absolutely not on point. And I want everyone on this call to, again, when you hear this claim, be critical, challenge it. Think of the fact that what they're claiming may not in fact actually bring more density, and then think about what is the quality of that density. Sometimes sheer density alone, if it provides no ability for interaction between human beings in a meaningful way, what is that density worth for the city? It is not worth much. Density presumes that there's interactivity between the people in that make up that density. And if we don't have that, density is not worth much. Next slide, please. Sustainability. Now, of course, you may have heard this word, sustainability. It is a buzzword thrown around all over the place. And oftentimes, again, it gets associated with the new. But I am here to remind you, next slide, please, that in this footprint, we need to be thinking about the long term. We need to be thinking about every single building in the site contains embodied energy carbon in a time when we are so worried about climate change and our overall impact as human beings on the overall global environment. Every building that gets demolished in this site to make way for new building is destroying the embodied energy and the carbon that has been accumulated there in many cases for over 100 years. And that is a real loss. That is a cost. And is that cost actually accounted for in the environmental impact statement for this project? And, you know, again, sometimes things go against what you think of as intuitive. And there was a study from the National Trust that finds that it takes 10 to 80 years, depending on the place and the building type, for a new building that is 30% more efficient than an average performing existing building. The negative climate change impacts outweigh that new building for that many years. So we need to be thinking here about whether it actually makes sense. And I say this all in the context of another question that we all need to ask. Is this Empire Station complex or this Penn area complex really about transit, or is it about development? Is it about yet another land grab? That is a fundamental threshold question that we need to keep in mind every time we read a story about this project, every time we hear a claim from a politician. And next slide, please. You can do something about it. You know, there's been several people who've made it clear that there are actions to take. We are going to have a tour of some of the historic sites in this complex in the near future, so stay tuned. We'll be sending out an invitation to the people who are here tonight. But I want to encourage you to testify. There is one, count it, one public hearing on December 8th by the Empire State Development Corporation. That is from 5 to 8 p.m. You have to register in advance, so go to their website and please do register and testify. And maybe more importantly, Governor Hochul has come out in support of essentially the same plan as Governor Cuomo had. She has tweaked it ever so slightly, but it is essentially the same thing. You need to let her know. She has not really had any kind of setback or black eye since she took office. And I think she thinks that she can get away with this. I would encourage you to call her and tell her that is not the case. This is a grave mistake. And if she wants to, you know, stay the course and have a good record, she needs to do something more to ameliorate the real problems with this complex. And you have her phone number right there. Please do give her a call. And finally, I wanted to recognize someone. I'm speaking here tonight solely as a representative of the Preservation Committee of the City Club of New York, but someone who really needs to be recognized. Peter Sampton is with us tonight on this Zoom. And Peter is someone we will hear from during the Q&A. He was there in the 1960s in that famous picket opposing the demolition of the original Penn Station. And I am so glad he has joined us here because this is an error of the same magnitude. So Peter, thank you for being here, and we look forward to hearing from you later this evening.
Oh, that's great news. Thank you so much, Brad. Really, really appreciate that. And next, we're going to have Andrew Cronson, who's Vice President of Safe Chelsea, and he's going to show you visually the assets that are looking at being destroyed, as well as how these assets could be repurposed and how we repurpose assets all over the city. So Andrew, please take it away and go right ahead. I think, do we need to do sharing for Andrew? Are you good? Great, great. Okay, good.
Thank you, Anne. I'm going to, I guess, sort of go drop off book here and say that it's really something hearing the experience of people who went through this fight already for Penn Station, who were part of Agony, who were there with Jane Jacobs. And it's so different now as someone who is much younger, who never got to see Penn Station, someone who was 25 years old, seeing this area as something that is really able to be lost again. And it's really heartening to see the people who are here and support, and also the younger people like myself who value these buildings, value our past, and know the value that they have. So we're going to go through a brief slideshow to sort of see the area around Penn Station in a new light. Among the many buildings that are at risk, there are several that are planned to be demolished imminently, and there are others that are under risk of demolition later down the line. And first, we'll go over the ones that are at risk immediately. 7 Penn Plaza, or 370 7th Avenue, was designed by Sommerfield and Steckler, which was a prominent designer of store and loft structures, which accommodated the growing industry of garment companies and furriers around Penn Station. This was part of a large number of many loft buildings that served the thriving garment district, which was one of the largest employers of New Yorkers in its era. It still stands as offices. It has been declared as being eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. Another building that is at imminent threat is St. John the Baptist Church at 211 West 30th Street, which was designed in 1872 by Napoleon Le Brun, with a tower that was later added by William C. Schickel in 1891. If the name LeBron sounds familiar, he designed the Metropolitan Life Tower at Madison Square Park and was responsible for the design of nearly every firehouse in New York in the late 19th century. This large complex of the church and other buildings that are situated with it were eligible for the National Register and the designation of New York City landmark. Next door to the church, or behind it, is the Fairmount Building, which was designed in 1923 by likely an architect named Joseph C. Scheffler for J.M. Heatherton, who was a publication executive, and it housed the offices of his company as well as many furriers in its earlier years of operation. The building was declared as eligible for the National Register in December of 2018. .242 West 31st Street was designed in 1908 by the glorious firm of McKim, Mead and White for the Pennsylvania, New York, and Long Island Railroad Company to house its critical powering services for the original Penn Station, including the electricity, light, heat, elevator hydraulics, and compressed air, as well as refrigeration. The service building is the largest remnant that still stands in the original station. It has been declared as eligible for the National Register as well as New York City landmark status. While the building itself is quite remarkable in its whole piece, if you look at it in sections, it is also quite remarkable and is very evident of the remarkable work of McKim, Mead and White. It spans 8 bays separated by nearly flat Roman Doric pilasters at the first 3 floors. The windows on the first floor are covered by projected iron grills, a favorite feature of the McKim firm. 371 7th Avenue, or the Stewart Hotel, was designed by Murgatroyd and Ogden with George B. Post and Sons as a 31-story Governor Clinton Hotel for the Kenab Holding Company. An underground tunnel was built to connect the hotel with the train station, Penn Station, and the subway. It is eligible for the National Register of Historic Places and New York City landmark status. The striking design of Romanesque and Northern Italianate styles of the building featured double height arcades and setbacks with crenellated cornices in the upper floors. It is a visual treat to look at, and it is one that has been maintained even on the inside as well, with many of its original function rooms still intact, as well as the lobby, albeit slightly altered. 401 7th Avenue was designed in 1910 by the preeminent firm of McKim, Mead and White for the Pennsylvania Terminal Real Estate Company. It was planned to aesthetically and urbanistically complement the nearby General Post Office, which is now the Moynihan Station, and the original Pennsylvania Station, which McKim and Mead and White also designed. When it was built, it was the largest hotel in the world with 2,200 rooms. Its grand ballroom was a big band hotspot for great performers of the day, like Duke Ellington, Count Basie, and Glenn Miller. The hotel was made famous by the song Pennsylvania 6500, a phone number that still rang at the hotel switchboard. It has been declared as eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. What people know now as the Manhattan Mall at 100 West 33rd Street was designed in 1910 by Daniel H. Burnham for the Manhattan Hudson Realty Co. The 10-story building served as the flagship for the Gimbel Brothers department store. It is one of the few sites in all of New York City which was designed by Burnham, whose works include the iconic Flatiron Building and many of Chicago's greatest skyscrapers of its time. Because it was absent, the building's name and information was absent in the environmental reports for the Empire Station project. No impact at all was deliberated or assessed for the public to review if this building were to be lost. While the 1980s alteration by Rothschild, Kaiserman, and B obscured the exterior, it is still possible to bring back the original grandeur of the building. Attached to Gimbel's is its glorious sky bridge, which is an ornate three-story Art Deco traverse on 33rd Street, which was designed by Shreve and Lamb, who would later go on to design the Empire State Building down the street. The bridge connected the store with their administrative office across the street. As it was also absent from the environmental review for the project, no impact was assessed for its demolition. However, it was later found to be eligible for the National Register. Looking at it more closely, the Sky Bridge in this Art Deco style, which was barely seen in New York City, harkens to what was idealized at the time as the future of New York, with sky bridges and interconnected walkways as this great metropolis. While there are buildings that are threatened imminently, there are also several buildings which are indirectly threatened by later ensuing effects of this rapid change in the Penn area district. Between the Stewart Hotel and the Hotel Pennsylvania is 11 Penn Plaza, which was designed in 1922 by Starrett and Van Vleck for the Equitable Life Insurance Company. If the firm of Starrett and Van Vleck is familiar, it is because they are known for their designs of the department stores of Saks Fifth Avenue, which recently closed, and Lord and Taylor, which recently closed, and Saks Fifth Avenue, which still remains open across from Rockefeller Center. This building, 393 7th Avenue, was declared as eligible for both the National Register and New York City landmark status. 463 7th Avenue, or the Arsenal Building, was designed in 1924 by Buchman and Kahn on the site of the former New York State Arsenal. It was reportedly one of the first designs of Eli Jacques Kahn's career. The ornate exterior was ornamented with sumptuous terracotta fabricated by the famed New York Terracotta Co. It is listed on the National Register, which unfortunately does not provide protection from most demolition, but it is also New York City landmark eligible. As we look at the detail of this building, there are intricate abstract foliate patterns that decorate the Capitol, the piers, the top of the third floor. There are also other ornamentation of figures in terracotta, which are really remarkable. 201 West 34th Street was designed in 1929 by Walker and Gillette for the National City Bank of New York, at a time when the bank was the largest commercial bank in the entire world. While it is listed on the National Register like its partner across the street, It is also potentially a candidate for New York City landmarking. We'll see on the south wall, the bank's signature eagle, which was used in the exterior of most of their branches. Directly next to the Citibank is Nelson Tower, which was designed in 1929 by H. Craig Severance for Julius Nelson, a builder and executive in the dress manufacturing sector. At the time of build, it was the largest building in the vast garment district. It is both eligible for National Register and New York City landmark status. Further down 34th Street is the J.C. Penney Company, which was designed in 1926 by Schultz and Weaver as an office and warehouse building. The architect, Schultz and Weaver, was responsible for many of New York's great hotels, like the Waldorf Astoria, Sherry Netherland, and Pierre. The Penney Company building is eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. Another remarkable hotel in the Penn Terminal area is the New Yorker, which was designed in 1929 by Sugarman and Berger for Matt Canner, who was a developer. At the time of its build, the New Yorker was the largest hotel in all of Manhattan. It is eligible for both the National Register of Historic Places and a New York City landmark status. The last building we'll look at is the Sloan Apartments, which was designed in 1930 by Cross and Cross as the William J. Sloan YMCA. It was named for Sloan, who was the chairman of the National War Council of the YMCA during World War I. It was intended to provide social facilities and accommodations for men in the armed services, but is now used as apartments. It is eligible for both the National Register and New York City landmark status. As we discuss different ideas and alternatives for the Empire Station plan, one concept that cannot be overstated is the beauty and value of adaptive reuse when a building is converted from its original intended use to a new one. This can be done on really any building in any style with any sort of result, but it takes a little bit of ingenuity. We could find uses from retail to apartments to educational to religious, with the added benefit of having history to set them apart from all the others. If one wants to revitalize Penn Station to one that is hip and unique, what better way to do it than to make locations that draw interest and wonder from the public? And one very prominent adaptive reuse that was mentioned and has come to critical acclaim is the change of Moynihan Station, which was the Farley Post Office originally, and it has found a new use as part of Penn Station, and one that has been quite acclaimed. Some potential new uses, and one that Vornado Realty knows very well, is the notion of changing from retail to office buildings, which is seen at 770 Broadway and Astor Place, which was part of the Wanamaker department store. Another option is converting these hotels into student housing, like the former St. George Hotel in Brooklyn, which was converted into a dormitory. Given the meteoric rise in popularity of schools like NYU and FIT, and NYU in specific, which had to rent out part of the Stewart Hotel in 2015, it could become new housing for schools like FIT, NYU, the New School, or CUNY, which would be very fitting as a productive new use. Literally one block over from the former St. George Hotel is the Leverage Towers Hotel, which is now the Watermark at Brooklyn Heights as a luxurious retirement community. It was actually featured in the New York Times this week. The 1891 Holland House and Hotel and Nomad is now unique office space. Avenues, the World School in Chelsea, is housed in a former warehouse of R.C. Williams, a wholesale grocery company. CUNY Graduate Center on 34th Street is housed in the former B. Altman and Company flagship store. The former Station A post office by Thomas W. Lamb is now the Soho flagship for Apple. Cutting-edge retailers like Apple are increasingly looking to reuse old structures. Apple has also recently converted the DC Carnegie Library, the Tower Theater in California, and a former bank on Madison Avenue into flagship stores with great acclaim. They are not just looking for retail, they are looking for cutting-edge, unique retail with a story, and that's where they purposely seek out to open. As possible changes to the Penn Station powerhouse, we can look to on 53rd Street, the famed Avatar Studios, which recorded over 400 gold and platinum records from artists like Bruce Springsteen, Madonna, Paul McCartney, and the Rolling Stones. It is housed in a former 1927 powerhouse, which was built for Con Edison. It is now being reused again as the New York campus of the Berklee College of Music. Other conversions of industrial buildings include 39 Jane Street in the West Village, which was an electrical substation for the Edison Illumination Company and is now apartments, and the Brandt Foundation Center, which was another substation converted into an art gallery. Uses for the potential conversion of the church in question include the Atlantic Theater, which occupies the parish house of St. Peter's Church in Chelsea, or looking to the Children's Museum in Manhattan, which will occupy the First Church of Christ Scientists on Central Park West as their new location. One can also look to John's Pizzeria in Times Square, or the beautiful conversion of the former Second Presbyterian Church in Newark, which is a beloved office space, which was able to attract tenants like Audible, which want unique environments for employees. What if that uniqueness for employees wasn't fancy furniture, decor, or free lunches, but using the environment in a new way that is exciting and inviting to come to work every day? Other conversions from retail for institutional use include the Rubin Museum of Art, which is housed in the flagship, formerly of Barney's, New York, in Chelsea. And speaking of Barney's, their Uptown flagship, which unfortunately recently closed, is being converted into an art hub for galleries by T.E. Pfaff, the organizer of the world's leading art fair. And that is a conversion that is going on as we speak. Additionally, with the closure of the Pennsy, which was a food hall at Penn Station, one other option for the Penn Station service building is to be a food hall, like what is coming to 296 Canal Street, which was a former bank. These are just a handful of unique options that can come to these remarkable buildings. I hope this presentation will inspire you all to be thinking big, thinking about the changes, thinking about the options to come, and inspire you also to be ever better stewards of the many remarkable historic resources among which we live. Thank you all.
Andrew, I would applaud if I could get it across. That was wonderful. Thank you so much for that beautiful education. Now we have two more speakers. The next one is going to be Lorna No, who is the interim executive director of the Historic Districts Council. So please take it away, Lorna. Really appreciate it. And we'll answer questions at the end. Continue putting them in the chat. And yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. It's just an honor to be with the over 168 participants and my fellow panelists. The Historic Districts Council sees the proposed Empire District as a lost opportunity to preserve and protect a vital part of the city's landscape while creating a state-of-the-art train station. We feel these goals do not have to be mutually exclusive. A revised plan that incorporates vernacular architecture we've heard about, for which the area is known, into a 21st century transit center will demonstrate that New York City can honor the past while planning for its future. The proposal reminds us of a misguided 1950s era urban renewal project. Hasn't the city learned from the mistakes of the past? The words "don't tear it down" was a familiar battle cry at a time when wholesale destruction of intact neighborhoods was happening throughout the city. The fact that those words are now finding their way back into the public discourse should be a wake-up call. As we've heard, over 35 buildings in the area have been identified in the draft EIS as being worthy of state or national landmark recognition, and 10 of them could be eligible for New York City landmark designation. Losing these structures and the neighboring buildings will create a void in a vital part of Midtown Manhattan. Old should not be equated with obsolete. These streets are lined with independent businesses that contribute to the economic health of the city. Thousands of New Yorkers live and work in the neighborhood. Once displaced, they will have no place to go. The HDC strongly supports the creation of a historic district incorporating these buildings. As we've heard, the architects responsible for so many of them really is a who's who of revered designers whose work has long made our streetscapes come to life. Soulless super talls planned for the area will blight the landscape and pierce our hearts. A development whose size will exceed that of Hudson Yards is an affront to those who love this city. While no one can predict if and when the demand for new office space will match or exceed pre-pandemic levels, it's foolhardy to say the least, to go forward with the plan created before the rise of the work from home culture. The Landmarks Commission must act immediately to schedule hearings for all the buildings deemed worthy of designation. The Historic Districts Council will work with the commission to define the boundaries of a proposed Penn Station Historic District for approval. This concept has the full support of our colleagues, and we will work with them and the community to this point. Let's remember, it's been pointed out that it's been predicted that it will take 2 years to demolish the Hotel Pennsylvania. What does that say about sustainability and durability? Photographs of the demolition of the Hotel Pennsylvania will echo those devastating images of the destruction of the original Penn Station. Is this how we want to document the future of our city? Thanks very much.
Lorna, thank you for that rousing explanation of what's going on. Really appreciate that. So next we're going to hear from Cesar Nicolescu, who is from Rethink NYC, talking about, he's an architectural advisor, talking about what's going on. And then we'll talk to Sam and have a call to action and questions. So stand by. Go ahead, Cesar, take it away.
Hello. So I just wanted to quickly talk about the part of the advocacy that Rethink has been doing for the last few years, in which we're trying to change the metropolitan paradigm that New York's currently stuck in, and have a more expansive vision for the city, in which real estate interests aren't just trying to devour what little we have left of a historic Midtown. A lot of other cities around the world have larger cohesive transportation networks, and they encourage the creation of multiple central business districts that can access the entire regional labor market. This is called polycentric growth. And for about the last century, New York City's real estate industry members have really been almost conspiring on making sure that this doesn't happen, so that the only destination is Midtown. That's why Penn Station is a terminus for both New Jersey Transit and Long Island Railroad, rather than having them have integrative service and connecting to each other. So this illustration that you see is a vision that Rethink has generated for the future, and we want this to go hand in hand with preservation. And it's not just a pipe dream. This is simply common policy that, if you go to the next slide, Ben, that other cities around the world have been doing for the pretty much the whole 20th century. So Paris took this approach. They built the RER, replacing their old traditional terminal train stations that were built in the era of steam. And they used this transportation connectivity to expand their zone of development to include places outside the historic core. Famously, the Tour Montparnasse was built in the 1970s, and it to Parisians became a blot on the skyline, and they didn't want to repeat that, nor did they want to destroy their historic city center, which adds so much to the iconic value and thus also future economic viability of the city, right? Paris is Paris because of the way it looks and feels, not because of its ability to compete with Dubai or anything more generic. So this illustration shows in a telescopic view a business district, La Défense, rising in the distance, but it's still completely connected to the old city, which was preserved and was part of a growing economy. And Paris's metropolitan area today is, in fact, the largest metropolitan economy in all of Europe. And if you go to the next slide, Ben, please. And here we have another argument that we've been advocating for, which again is linked to the notion of preservation, and that's the fact that preservation is easier to plan when you have a real system of regional governance, so that you can actually coordinate this type of expansiveness. The fact that New Jersey, right across the river, has many potentials in terms of land use and transportation, but can't be considered because it's part of a different state, a different municipality, is absolutely absurd. If you look at London on the left, their business district and their core is in the middle of the jurisdictional geography of their governance. And within the case of New York, it's split. And I'm hoping that based on the previous two slides, you can understand that a lot of pressure that we have on Midtown to demolish historic urban fabric comes from the inability to think big. And governance solutions is a big step along the way, which we're advocating for. Next slide, please. Yeah. And lastly, we're not really talking in this panel about so much the need for growth, the need for attracting tech companies and whatnot, because we can say that that seems to be happening anyway. But if we're to really look at both economic growth and preservation hand in hand, we can see that the type of companies and the type of talent that we're really interested in attracting as a region isn't a good fit for places like Hudson Yards. I think it was Brad that was saying earlier that density, just for density's sake, is really not the point of building a business district, building a center. You want the interaction for it. Google chose Chelsea, or rather the cusp of Chelsea in the meatpacking district, occupying the old Port Authority building, which you see in the sort of middle ground over here behind those mid-19th century three-story buildings. In this picture, you see this extremely diverse urban fabric that as of late has become extremely monetized. And this is the type of urban fabric that the intersection of tech industry, knowledge industry, and talent wants in today's economy. And when we're throwing these sort of non-neighborhoods like Hudson Yards at companies, you're going to create a glut of a type of office space that, sure, it can possibly ameliorate the demand for raw office space, but it doesn't add to the brand value of the city. And what we'd like is a type of city in which neighborhoods like this are more scalable, so that we preserve more. And when we build, we actually build things that we like, and we build things that are part of the urban fabric. So that's our alternative to the type of Hudson Yards and Empire Station development strategy that we're fighting against. So yeah, I hope that what I've shown is sort of an effective illustration. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Cesar. And so interesting, those buildings in the forefront there are actually, I know that they said that they were going to save them, but I think there was like a protest about those white buildings there about a month ago. Because
Another fight.
Yeah, they're supposed to be torn down. Whatever. Any case, okay, Sam, call to action. Take it away. Go right ahead.
Well, let's hold at this slide. What I'd like to do is, we're very fortunate to have Peter Sampton in our panelists tonight, and you heard Peter reference before. He was one of the architects in the Ag-Bini organization. I'm not going to try to spell out all of the acronyms, but that was Jane Jacobs and Philip Johnson of all people, and Peter and others protesting, tearing down the original Penn Station. And I'd love to let Peter speak as a panelist, and then I'll follow him. So I hope, Peter, I'm not putting you on the spot, but we'd really love to have your participation.
And Peter, just turn your camera on. Go right ahead. Thank you. Great.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, can you see me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, all right. Well, I'm holding up here a picture of. This is a picture of our picket line in front of Penn Station 60 years ago, almost. Next year, it'll have been 60 years that we tried to, a bunch of young architects, we were all in our 20s, and we tried to save the great Pennsylvania station from being torn down. We got, as you saw in the picture, I think, we got Philip Johnson and Ulrich Franzen, well-known architect then, and Mrs. Aileen Saranan to come. And just the fact that we got these three well-known people, we got a lot of press. And there were literally front page articles in the New York Times the following day about young students and young architects trying to save the old Pennsylvania station, which at that point was not even 50 years old, I believe. It had been built in the early 1900s, and we're talking about 1961 approximately. Anyway, one of the outcomes of that picket line was that we, a group of us, young architects, again, all in our 20s, got to go to Mayor Wagner then, and we tried to prevail upon him not to tear the station down. He unfortunately had too many big-time builders behind him, and we failed in that. But what we did succeed in was the creation of the landmark law in New York, and that the Landmarks Preservation Commission and future landmarking began in 1965. So in a sense, we lost the station, but we gained many other buildings that would have been torn down had this not happened. That, in a sense, is the history of that time. And I'm so pleased that all of you are coming together. Maybe if we even think bigger about this, maybe we would tear down Madison Square Garden, create a new Penn Station, and find a new place for Madison Square Garden, which after 55, 60 years is not as functional as it could be. That's my comment.
Thank you, Peter. Really appreciate that. Sam, do you want to chat?
Sure.
Great. Thank you, Peter.
So in any event, I usually come on towards the end just before we get to the Q&A, and there have been some live, there will be live questions, and we have a lot of written questions from you, and we're not ignoring you. We'll alternate live questions, probably do 2 live questions, and then get to some written questions as well, and try to get through as many as we can. But look, you know, really exciting to see both 25-year-old Andrew talk so passionately about landmarks, and then have both Roberta and Peter here. You know, as far as I'm concerned, that's an intergenerational all-star lineup on how do we save our city. And I know a lot of you are thinking, gee, what can we do, and when can we do it? And I wanted to give you some of that. So in any event, just quickly, you know, one thing we're talking about, the most at-risk building is the Hotel Pennsylvania, and it will be difficult to stop the wrecking ball from happening, but we are not giving up. And we are willing to spend our capital on this issue. Some would say it's a lost cause. Why don't you throw in the towel? We're not doing that. And why do we believe that? Look at these pictures. You've got the hotel to the left where they painted the lower stonework, which is regrettable. But it really is not very different from the plaza. And, you know, we have this wonderful example of the Hotel Martinique, which is a block away. Now, these are going to be wonderful things in our city. And what they would rather do is tear everything down and let us somehow deal with it as widgets. Well, I for one, for many reasons, don't want to see that happen. So what is one of the things you can do is participate in Thursday night's Community Board 5 meeting. There are a couple of folks on that community board, including Layla Lloyd, Jessico, and EJ Keller. I have his last name wrong, but Kalafarsky, I think it is, and others who've been working very hard to represent you in this fight, and we owe it to them to show up and be loud and let people know this just is not acceptable. You know, you've heard from both Lynn and from Brad about this December 8th public hearing being sponsored by New York State. You'll be allowed to make a 2-minute statement, but you also can submit written materials before January 8th. And what I would encourage you to do is look at the environmental impact statement that's on the New York State website for the Empire Station complex. And there are probably 22 variables that are looked at in an environmental impact statement: view corridors, shadows, impact on historic assets, various environmental things. Pick 2 or 3 that are important to you, figure out what your best arguments are and get them in. Environmental impact statements, you know, are important. I think I saw Marcy Benstock is on this call, who is somebody who was very successful in the Westway fight based on the impact on striped bass in the Hudson River. And she fought lonesomely, but with help for a long time. And you know, that's hopefully we'll be able to replicate something like that. It's not easy. I'm not here to pretend it's easy, but it's just great to see so many people doing this. Next slide.
And Sam, just we're getting a lot of comments about links to the ability to testify, and for both CB 5 and for the hearing on. So we'll get those links and we'll send them to everybody in the follow-up email.
We will. We always send this deck out the morning after, and the materials are linked there, and we will make sure that you have those. You can also, if you don't trust us, heaven forbid, if you go into Community Board 5's website, you can register there. And if you go into the Empire State Development Corp's website, you can register there. But I promise you, we will get this out to you. Call your elected officials, you know, the Manhattan officials in the Assembly and the City Council and State Senate did oppose this proposal earlier on. There seems to maybe be some vacillation among a few lately. I think you got to let them know you're not happy and you have not been fooled by the media blitz that accompanied the governor's announcements. It sounded like she made wholesale revisions to the governor's plan. That's really not true. As Brad said, it's really essentially the same thing. They've scaled back the density 7%. They have provided a modest view corridor to the Empire State Building and some other improvements, but it is bigger than Hudson Yards. Penn Station is still underground, and they're going to eliminate all these beautiful, or many of the beautiful buildings you saw. Sign our petition. We'll have that also available in what we send out. And look, reach out to your block associations, political clubs, community boards, and civic organizations, and let them know you expect leadership to fill this project. The Village Reform Democratic Club had a presentation a few weeks back. The calls were coming into me and others that the fix was in. The Empire State Development Corporation made their presentation. While there were some people supporting what they had to say, the public was very loud in opposition, and you could see the impact that had on the elected officials in the room. Like, okay, maybe the governor's announcement hasn't swayed the public, and we've got to make sure that they know that. The other thing, visit our constituent organization websites, learn more about what we're doing to shape a better citizen-centric future for New York. You heard what Lynn said at the beginning. I think that's absolutely true. Human Scale's doing a great job. I loved Chazar's slide of a mixed-use area of New York where, of all people, Google wants to be located. They're not clamoring to be Hudson Yards. They like the New York City look and feel. And I'll just close with one comment on density, because I always take more time than I'm supposed to, but I received a nasty gram suggesting that as someone who's with a transit-oriented organization, I should be pressing for density at transit facilities come hell or high water. And why would I want to side with the Pennsylvania Hotel Pennsylvania, and how could that possibly be an irreplaceable architectural artifact? Well, I'll let Richard Cameron speak to that in a little bit, but I think the fact that it was part of a triptych of buildings by McKinney and White alone qualifies it for more than passing thought about being destroyed. But this idea that you need to have density at train stations, I completely reject. I have commuted in and out in intra-New York City my whole life. Commuters do not mind walking 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes to a train station at all. In fact, it's good for them. It helps them with their Fitbit and many other aspects of their lives. And when you're in a great, vibrant city like New York, it makes it worthwhile. And when I passed back to this person who was so density crazy was, I bet a lot of people wish the MetLife building was never built. It is considered the most hated building in New York, perhaps other than the Port Authority and the current Penn Station. And there's a reason for that. We would have had Parisian style vistas from 50, 70 blocks north of Grand Central Terminal to 40 blocks south. It would have been a signature iconic image for New York City, and it's gone. It's destroyed. Once you build something like that, it's very hard to get them to take it down or think about a view corridor or public space. We've got to make sure they don't do that here. I think Andrew has done a sensational job of showing you that this is not a blighted neighborhood. They never should have declared this a blighted neighborhood. The only thing blighted in this neighborhood is all the cacophonous traffic caused by Madison Square Garden and landlords letting a hotel like the Hotel Pennsylvania be mismanaged and a few other things. But it is that is not a blighted neighborhood. That neighborhood has tremendous upside, and we should be fighting dearly to preserve that. And that is not to say that we are opposed to all development. There are plenty of one-story post-war sites in the neighborhood of no particular impact that people, including the developers in this plan, own. Have at it with those. Don't blow up the zoning code, but have at it with those, but do it in a way that's smart and do it in a way that maintains what is the draw of this city. It is not a mistake that Hollywood spends a lot of time in New York City, and it is because of those interesting vistas like Chazar showed you and Andrew showed you and Ann was talking about. So let's fight for this city. We do not need Dubai or Shanghai or Houston. We just don't need it. We need New York City, and we need it now more than ever. Thank you, and we'll go to the Q&A.
Thanks, Sam. Do we want to let Richard say a few words about the Hotel Pennsylvania?
Happy to if we want that lead off.
Richard, you have the floor. If you, Richard Cameron, renowned architect, if you want to say a few words, go right ahead. You're a panelist, or you're I allowed you to speak. Yeah, there you go.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, gotcha.
Okay, good. I have no idea. I had to stop off somewhere to get on this, so I don't have a video connection, but I was thinking, listening to this, it's actually it's a great presentation tonight, and I was struck by two things. One is that I'm always astounded by how New Yorkers are willing to settle, which is incredible given how New Yorkers love to talk about New York being the greatest city in the world and blah blah blah, but they're always willing to settle for like fifth best. And the people who built Penn Station and the Hotel Pennsylvania and the post office, and we could go on and on, the New York Public Library, the Grand Central Station, were most definitely not willing to settle for second or fifth best. And I don't understand, and I'm a relatively recent arrival here, I've been here for 30 years, why New Yorkers love to brag about how they come from the greatest city on earth and the Big Apple and all this, and they're willing to settle for stuff that no one would put up with in the most fourth-rate cities on earth. We live on one of the greatest natural harbors on earth. We are the center of commerce for the planet, along with several other cities. And the fact that we allow sort of venality to control the destiny of the city, as opposed to the citizenry saying, if we really believe this is the greatest city on planet Earth, shouldn't we have it look like the greatest city on planet Earth, like Paris or London or Rome or you name it, right? So on the one hand, that's what strikes me, and what's astounding about what's going on right now with the Hotel Pennsylvania is that the exact same arguments were used. So we have people from Ag Benny on this call. The exact same arguments are being used by Steve Roth and Vornado right now that were used back then. And for all the protesting and having Mr. Johnson there and, eventually getting Jackie Kennedy involved, thank God, to save Grand Central, right? We lost the station because we couldn't influence the process. So the thing I would say is that I think we need to revise the approach. I mean, it's fine to protest, it's fine to call your politicians, it's fine to get your voice out there, it's fine to do whatever. But I was actually looking down the list of the board of directors of Vornado Realty Trust tonight. And I think everyone on this call ought to look down that list and see if they know anyone on that list and call them up and find out if they can get to them or to Steve Roth, who's the chairman, or buy some shares in Vornado and show up to a shareholder meeting, because until we can affect Vornado, we won't stop another venal developer from giving us a fifth-rate city. And my call to action is take some action that will actually affect the outcome here. Because otherwise, come January, February, Steve Roth has had a demolition permit for the Hotel Pennsylvania in hand since 2008. And, according to the latest websites, they've cleared out the mattresses, they've cleared out the rooms, they've cleared everything. They're going to start demolition in January or February of next year. And going out there and chaining ourselves to the building and protesting and getting in the New York Times, if we even could do that, won't affect the outcome. So we're going to have to actually go and try to affect the people that have control over this and get them to understand that we do live in the greatest city on earth and it should look like that. And that's really my only point. But thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Really appreciate that. Okay, Sam, I think we're ready to go to the Q&A.
Okay, I think that's right. And the members of the Empire Station Coalition can turn their videos on, and Ann will help direct questions. As I said, we'll take one or two live questions and then take some of the written questions that have been building up as well. And we will try to get to everyone. And if we don't tonight, please keep after us and we will make sure to get to you.
So do we want to start with, we'll start with the first question that was asked quite a while ago. From what I've read and heard, Vornado's big influencing excuse is that they're having financial difficulties and can't afford to restore the white elephants like the Hotel Pennsylvania. So the poor dears have to destroy everything to make a profit to stay aloft. Any comments on that?
Brad?
Yeah, I'd be happy to jump in on that. I think that is, to put it mildly, completely bunk. There are all kinds of examples around the country. If you look at the NTCIC, it's the National Trust Community Investment Corporation. This is a wing of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and it's focused specifically on using various tax credits to put together a package that can restore large-scale historic buildings and adaptively reuse them. And hotels, I can tell you from my time in New Orleans post-Katrina, are absolutely part of what they focus on. There are many examples in New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Baltimore, all over the country. It is about whether the owner decides that they have a will to adaptively reuse a building. That is what makes the decision for the fate of buildings like Hotel Pennsylvania. And we unfortunately have a situation where the owner just does not want to go down that path. But it is eminently possible. It is absolutely something that can be done, and there are ways to do it, and there are precedents all around the country.
Thanks, Brad.
And I would just say, Joy, I think you asked what's the best argument that would flatten this overinflated excuse, and I would say the Hotel Martinique, which is being funded by Midwestern investors. You know, we should get the same renderer who did that rendering, and the Hotel Pennsylvania could be, and actually Richard did some work a while back for Vornado. They could be a wonderful hotel. Or any number of other uses. And so, but I think the Hotel Martinique, to me, which is a block away on a neighborhood that's growing and improving and maintaining much of the history, albeit there are some taller hotels going in below 30th Street. But they're doing some interesting things over there, and that New York character and feel is a winner.
Can I add something to that?
Go right ahead.
First of all, why is anybody worried about Vornado? They wouldn't know how to do a preservation project if it fell in their lap. They are totally new development oriented. And who cares if what they say? Short of money, give me a break. I'm not interested in them. It's the politicians, it's the governor. Those are the people who need to be targeted. And furthermore, one of the things occurred to me as the presentations went on. One of the most interesting things, and I've referred to this in various points, the most interesting thing happening in the city is the moving into old buildings, often historic buildings, of the biggest tech companies in the country. Amazon, Google, all of them, Apple, and this is scaring the daylights out of the new developers, because the real interest in people with taste is for existing buildings that have character. You don't see them flocking to Hudson Yards so quickly, but they are moving into Lord and Taylor's. They're moving into all of Chelsea. They're moving into the existing historic buildings, designated or not. Secondly, forget trying to persuade the Landmarks Commission to do anything. They are the worst they have been in years, and they would never touch anything as politically sensitive as this. Go to the places where you can have an impact, and that is clearly on the politicians involved, and scare the shit out of some of the others. But don't waste your breath on advocating a historic district. That commission now wouldn't know how to declare a historic district in some of the most fundamental districts that we exist. And as far as Vornado is concerned, I wouldn't believe a word they say. And someone in the chat said that the Empire State Development Corporation made a survey of the district that I was referring to. Do you believe their numbers? I have not, in 50 years of covering this city, ever seen a report from a planning agency, state or local, that it was not filled with, if not lies, at least errors. They're going to give you the information they want you to have. It's your own information is the only information you can trust.
Thank you, Roberta.
Folks,
Appreciate that.
if you want to ask a live question, hit the raise hand, and Ann will try to get you up in front of us. But we will go through the written questions as well.
Okay, Sam. And the next one's from John Manning. I'm unaware of any fair and scientific public opinion polls on all this. However, just chatting with people in all different kinds about this for decades, I've always felt the vast majority of the population supports the human scale way. That's our, yep, we agree. Remember what a hot issue it was in the 1970s when Old Yorkville, one of the city's greatest neighborhoods, was being overrun with 40 and 60-story high-rises. Well, I just have to say, I live in Yorkville, and I live around the corner from three new developments that are all over 40 stories. So Yorkville is not saved. And I'm not quite sure exactly what your question is here, John, but development is everywhere.
I think I could, their polling is happening a lot these days. If you go to the Rethink Penn Station NYC, we did some polling on rebuilding Penn Station, something more akin to the original than some of the other plans. And it was a professionally done poll, and you can look at that. Now, look, the RPA just came out with a poll, or suggested in an article by Tom Wright and Elizabeth Goldstein, that they did some polling that 90% of the people want to see the Penn Station area addressed. And, that answer doesn't surprise me. I didn't hear what they wanted
Another
addressed.
unbelievable lie.
Well, in any event, our poll was not a lie, and the data is there, and people can see the backup data. But yes, you're right, Roberta. What are they saying? People, there are a lot of different polls beginning to emerge on these subjects, and I can tell you that while limited, and it doesn't cover the entirety of the human scale needs of the whole neighborhood, it focuses more on the 2 blocks that are the present Penn Station. There is an honest poll on our website. And Roberta, even you would read it and believe it.
I believe you. I don't believe RPA.
Yeah, well,
You
I'll
don't
be
have to
nice for
answer to
tonight.
that.
I'll be nice for tonight. But let's keep going. Any live questions? Please don't be shy. There are a lot of you on, and we want you to have your day in the sun on this issue.
Richard Levin, I allowed you to speak if you want to ask your question. Richard Levin from the attendees. He had raised his hand. All right, well, raise your hand again, Richard, and
he may have to unmute himself, and you may need to unmute him.
I did.
Okay.
Hold on. He has to unmute.
Well, I can jump in until there's another question. I put the comments. I was thinking that, yes, obviously I feel that most New Yorkers are more inclined to a human scale vision for our city. The problem is that we have a lack of balance of power. Real estate really has seized our government in a way. It's called regulatory capture, and they own too many of our politicians. They have excessive, overweening influence on too many of our regulatory agencies. All 13 members of the City Planning Commission are basically from real estate. Like, we don't have regulatory bodies that represent actual citizens anymore. It's like every agency has become part of the real estate apparatus, and it requires a massive fix. But I think one of the problems is that New Yorkers need to wake up to this. It wasn't always like this. people didn't really ever have a lot of power, but I think it was progressively under city administrations culminating in the Bloomberg era. We just got, excessive influence became total power. And, we got to back the city away from that. And that really is going to require charter reform and other kinds of change. But people have to be made aware that the villains of the piece are not just the politicians, they're the people who own the politicians. So that's why I want to say that in this, like, is it Vornado? Is it the politicians? It's both. So when I throw out suggestions about we should picket Vornado, it's more like, this is a great way to get ordinary people involved and aware of the problem on the street. They can see it. It's a way to attract attention. It's a way to build larger support for this cause. At the same time, we have to hammer the politicians and create competition among them so that, Kathy Hochul is like, whoa, my competitors for this job are starting to question what I'm doing at Penn Station. I think that's the only way we can get it to stop, is they have to feel like their job is threatened if they don't back down a little bit on this thing. But at the same time, why not villainize Vornado? They are the villains. So
They are. Thank you, Lynn. So T. Lawrence Sweetman, you have a
That's a
question?
good segue into what I was about to say. Indeed, my thoughts are, I have to agree. I mean, having been tear gassed way too many times in my youth, trying to stop a war called Vietnam and getting nowhere. It wasn't until years after we gave up that the war actually ended, and it had nothing. We can scream and cry and suffer all we want in that way if we want to, and it's probably not going to get anywhere. So my points are, just by taking somebody on a tour of what Vornado put out as a reason, I think it was Vornado or ESC put out as a reason why this is a neighborhood that can be essentially erased because it's useless. For example, their picture of my own building was probably taken, well, certainly in the last decade, but at least more than 6 years ago, perhaps even 20 years ago, because it looked the same for a long time. The previous landlord did work quite hard at keeping up its appearance and did an incredible job and meticulously redid the front of the building to make it look like it was in 1929 when it was built. But more recently, a new landlord took over and has spent so far, well, I know for sure, above $50 million. I think probably approaching beyond $70 million, renovating the building. So they were showing pictures from so long ago. And I similarly referencing other structures that in a way that will clear lies. I mean, accurate if this report were being released, 5 or 7 years, 10 years ago, whatever. If there was any toehold we could get on a legal setting there. I'm not a lawyer, by the way. I really I can't think of in those terms. Similarly, in the questions and answers I got to read here, there was a point about the 1916 zoning law that, let's see, I'll read from it. There are multiple buildings at risk in the complex site that reflects the ziggurat/wedding cake upper floor tiered arrangements that shows the direct impact of the 1916 zoning law's attempt to ensure light and air for the streetscapes. Is there any way has that been wiped off the books? Did anybody know this stuff?
Amended a million times.
But nevertheless, still a significant factor in terms of highlighting the significance of the architecture if you're making the case for its value and potentially for why it should be landmarked or at least recognized on the National Register. So, as Roberta points out, that law has long been sort of changed out of existence in many ways, but the fact that these buildings were built to reflect that law is significant in terms of why a building might need to be saved. Yes.
Well, I want to add in there that, the 1916 zoning code and then the zoning enabling legislation that they passed, like 1928, 1930, modeled on sort of a federal model of what zoning law should look like. That was a state law. All of the laws share that the purpose of zoning is to protect the broader public good and the broad public welfare. And that hasn't changed. So it's just that it's not applied. You know, nobody's pursuing the public interest, they're pursuing private interests. And that's, again, a problem in the implementation of regulation. So
the interpretation has changed. And in every case where we've had over the years, these big projects, they automatically, under all circumstances, declare the neighborhood blighted because they need that blighted application to justify going through the renewal process. It has nothing to do with whether it is blighted or not. This goes back to, you know, the north end of Boston and a lot of other places considered blighted only because the city had another agenda for the area and it had nothing to do with the real law.
Right. Well, and blight pretexts have historically always been just that, pretexts.
Right.
Buildings in this area around Penn Station, yes, they may have some soot on them, but if we learn nothing else from the destruction of Penn Station, I think we need to learn that very basic fact that just because a building looks run down and has some soot on it does not mean that it does not have another life in it.
Yeah, just as a quick zoning point I want to make, and then I want to let it get to the next question. One of the real dangerous things that I think that most of us are aware of that's happening in New York City is we've got to this situation where we only fund infrastructure projects by selling zoning variances. And, you know, when this proposal first came out, I said, we are mortgaging the heavens for mediocrity at ground level, because to do all this, blow up a neighborhood and build these wall of super talls and block, use the Empire State Building and add all this density where, you know, our sideways safety regulations are being thrown out the window to get an underground Penn Station, that's really, really a bad bargain. And we are going to have to figure out, and I've talked among my Rethink colleagues and said, and Lynn and I are on this all the time, as are others, this cannot be the funding model. New Jersey is not funding the gateway tunnels by selling zoning variances. Now, we might, you know, effectively say, well, nobody cares about building 12 buildings over there, but they're somehow figuring out how to pay for it without selling zoning variants. And this has become the crack cocaine of Manhattan, and it is destroying it. And if the landmarks preservation law seems like it's not being executed faithfully enough today, it is only going to get worse, because they're going to make the economic motivation on each given parcel of land in Manhattan so high that you're only going to have the most cherished landmark standing. Everything else is going to be torn down. And the Empire State Development Corp is very proud at these meetings to say, we believe you need office towers from river to river. I'm stunned. I'm with Richard Cameron on that one. I'm stunned when they say that. But I've talked enough. We should get to a quick next question.
Thank you, Samuel.
I think Lorna wanted to say something. Lorna, do you have a comment you want to make? You need to unmute.
Hi,
Yeah.
thank you. Just point out that New York has historically two great transportation hubs, Grand Central and the Grand Central City, and the area around Penn Station. And the area around Grand Central is being threatened now. It's changing so much. And if we're losing that, we lose Penn Station. What do we have left? And that's something else to think about. We're looking at historical precedents. We're looking at examples in other cities where it's been enhanced and respected. And here we're threatening both of our centers.
Very good point. I was just thinking the exact same thing. Yeah.
Another
Thank
comment to throw in there, if I can. So I've heard a lot of fussing from various sources that, oh my God, it's too expensive to move Madison Square Garden. How are we going to pay for that? And, you know, it's not a problem. There's $13 billion allocated to build 4 tower jails in each borough, except Staten Island, sorry, the four boroughs, next to each courthouse. Some of that is for demolishing the existing buildings on Rikers Island. And then I'm like, wait a minute, you don't need to do any of that. You could take $3 billion of that project. You could renovate Rikers Island up the wazoo until it's a paradise and put a little bridge to the Bronx. It's only 1,500 feet to the Bronx right there. A pedestrian bridge to a bus stop in the Bronx. Rikers Island could be fantastic. You don't need 10 new tower jails. The current jail in Manhattan borough is empty now. It's an actual empty jail. So why are we building 10 new tower jails for $10 billion? Just take that money and put it into moving Madison Square Garden. You know, a little creativity, a little creative thinking could go far to solving these problems at lower cost. It's obvious that the only reason they're contemplating any of this is because Vornado wants it and Vornado owns the politicians. And, you know, we have to call them out on it. And we have to find politicians who won't cave in. So all that audience there, you're 131 people left. Who's going to primary out our politicians in Manhattan who are caving? There's a bunch of them. There's some city council members that are caving. There are some borough presidents that are caving. There are some state assembly members and senators who are caving. They need to be primaried out if they're going to cave in on this project. I mean, don't, if you're going to a fight, win it. Let's win it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lynn.
I
Steve
also wanna
Marmon, you're
pull out,
next.
if I may, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Andrew. And then Steve's next.
When we look at construction of buildings, there are, of course, jobs generated, temporary jobs in construction. They are paid well jobs, they are often union jobs. But what we're not also looking at is the value of restoration, which not only creates jobs, but also creates jobs that have skills to them. Historic restoration in America is something that has been really forgotten, to the point where there are only several major restoration firms here in New York City that operate regularly, compared to England, compared to France, compared to around the world, which has been able to not only maintain their trades in the old world tradition, but have them be promoted among people who are young, make them a career path that is not only respected, but is something that is cherished. And being able to do projects and restore these buildings creates even further economic impact than just construction, by making jobs that are for people who have these skills and making opportunities for them to put them to work, which is far beyond any construction firm could ever do for even the most grandiose Fortune 500 tech company project in just glass and steel.
Preservation jobs are not in the unions. And the unions are as powerful as the real estate. And I have overseen a major restoration job in this city, and we didn't have one union employee because that's not where restoration jobs are. And the unions are as powerful as the developers they build for. Sadly.
Sadly, yes. And Eldridge Street Synagogue is absolutely spectacular.
And not a union job on it.
Beautiful. Thank you. Steve Marmon, you're up. Next question.
Yes, I'd like to suggest that while Vornado is obviously key to anything in this area, I think even more important is Madison Square Garden Corporation. Without moving the garden, it is impossible to create a great transit hub again. And whether it is, as Richard Cameron has brilliantly designed, to a new expanded garden at Herald Square directly across from Macy's, or to another site, which I don't think would be as good given the superb mass transit opportunities at Herald Square. The key to solving this issue is going to be dealing first with Madison Square Garden. And there I would say there is some opportunity. A brand new city administration is coming in. And politically, having worked for Mayor Koch, Senator Moynihan, I can tell you that a politician who has just been reelected to a new 4-year term is not going to be very amenable to killing a project. On the other hand, if you can show them a way that the project is better, then you could come up with a viable coalition using city people. Remember, the use permit for Madison Square Garden expires in less than 2 years. And therefore, the garden is going to be in a position where it's got to get something from the city. So while you, yes, can go to city officials and say, gee, we're going to stand against you in the future, they're not going to be that concerned about opposition 4 years from now, since they just got reelected a month ago. Rather, go to them and say, here's a plan that will give you more. It'll give you a bigger and better Madison Square Garden. It will bring back, as Richard has brilliantly designed, a new and improved Penn Station, a revised, restored version of the original, with a great entrance on 8th as well as 7th, with connections to the Hudson Yards complex, with opportunities for open space, both on the north and the south. But the first thing to do is pressure on Madison Square Garden Corporation. Yes, Vornado needs to be stopped from destroying the Hotel Pennsylvania, but key to doing anything is getting the garden to agree to move.
Steve, we're in directional agreement with you. You know that we've showed 6 sites for the garden to move. One I don't mention anymore because Marcy's on the phone. But we think that the public needs to have real conversation about it. And you can't have this conversation and say, well, I don't want to weigh in on where it moved. People are going to have to make decisions about that. You're talking about the site on Herald Square. Vashon Chakrabarty has one mid-block. I think that Madison Square Garden and related companies have discussed a Hudson Yards site, given the changes in the city's real estate market. It did not help. I think some of us were hoping the governor would take her time with this proposal, because I think now that she seems to be indicating that she's going to help them lock in this deal, I don't think that helps in motivating James Dolan to move the garden. But at the Village Reform Democratic Club, Robert Atterbury from Nadler's office said this is all still in play and being discussed. I think the door might still be open, but I don't think I think we have a real timing issue and we've got to get after this. But we certainly have been projecting different Madison Square Garden sites and willing to take the heat for some of them as well. So we don't disagree with you, and we have a multi-pronged agenda. And while everybody's giving a lot of ideas for what we're doing, we are trying to multitask and pursue the different strategies that are holistic, but ultimately are moving in the same direction. And certainly, Roberta, none of us are saying that this plan should go forward in some amended fashion. We think this plan is an anti-urban juggernaut and one of the worst things that will happen to New York City in many, many years. And it will freeze frame that in concrete for 50 to 75 years. And if you hate the MetLife building, multiply it times 10.
I agree, but I'm just saying that as you know, Sam, while my preference is to the Herald Square site, my point is that moving the garden has got to be a key effort of anything being done here, if we're to come up with any alternative plan. And given the garden's lack of popularity and the Dolan family's lack of popularity and lack of political support, I believe that an effort can be made to get them to agree to move, which then opens the possibility for other things. So yes, we need to put pressure on Vornado, but I would also say that a list of board members of the Madison Square Garden Corporation, which is obviously controlled by the Dolan family in the way that Ross controls Vornado. But we need to look at pressure on them as well as Vornado, because I think they're key.
Well,
Thank you,
Steve,
Stephen.
remember me to Herald Square, and we will keep that.
Indeed.
So we have a question here that was sent in at 7:50 from Nancy Bruning. These are great examples, Andrew. So this is for you, Andrew. What would it take to find potential owners for Penn Station area who would be interested in conversions as you had demonstrated? You're on mute.
Andrew.
That's a very good question. And one of the things that I think is really neat is trying to tap into really what's changing in the city. And one of the examples that I gave was for residence halls, for students. And while I will admit that oftentimes when these buildings are built, they are built by universities themselves. There are a number of residence halls I know offhand that NYU has. I graduated from NYU, that are not owned by the university, but are owned by private entities. One example, I believe, is Corrigan, which is a private real estate developer. They pay taxes on the building, they funded it, they rent it, they run it, and NYU rents it. And these universities are looking for places for students. They're looking for places for academic space. NYU has been going very strongly about rebuilding and building new buildings. They even rented next door to the Hotel Pennsylvania at the Stewart Hotel. I'm very shocked that there are not schools that are looking into this. I'm shocked that there are not sort of the academic world and these sort of worlds that are not looking into these issues and trying to figure out how they could build on those sites as reused examples of architecture for their use.
And
And
not
it would
to
bring
say
in
anything
academic.
about their donors. Vornado spreads its money around all over the place.
Having these sites being reused as academic spaces would also bring in interest from students, bringing their dollars, many wealthy students to these areas who would patronize businesses and would be, I'm sure, very useful in terms
You're
of that.
absolutely right.
And the
would be-
universities are big employers, and someone like NYU might even give Vornado a run for his money. So it's an interesting city.
And also,
We're going to
Dan,
take
I'm
a
sure
couple more
the-
questions. We'll go a little into overtime and then wrap up. And we appreciate everybody's patience, and we're sorry to keep you up so late. Who's next,
So
Dan?
Carol Weinstein, you should be able to ask your question now if you want to. Carol Weinstein, you still there?
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we got you.
Okay. I've mentioned a couple of things. I think in the back of this are the money that companies like Vornado and whatever, the real estate and the real estate industry contributes to the campaign of these politicians, and having limits as to how much can be spent on a campaign would be worth trying. There's all sorts of limits on how much money can come from any one party, but not that I know of on how much one can spend on a campaign. It's not so preposterous. For instance, I believe in the UK, they don't allow TV advertising because that costs so much money. Then what I think is very sad is that in the Moynihan Station, as fine a landmark as it is, there's no place to sit, really. How does something like that consider the needs of people? And then what might be good is to talk to the mayor. Oh, have I gone over time?
No, go ahead, Carol, keep going.
And see what he can do about seeing that the Landmark Commission isn't only made up of people from the real estate industry.
Forget
Yeah.
it.
to do something about that.
So that's the
Well,
mayor.
I think this project may be something that, look, I joined this coalition this January. And I've been with Rethink and efforts like this for a while. And folks in the coalition like Lynn, Brad, and others, and they've been at it for a lot longer, and we're going to have to stay aligned. And this is a really important battle, and there are going to be more. And I think there'll be others of us rejoining them, and it's going to have to be a constant pressure point. And one of my motivations in this is from the start, because I've been more focused on the station itself. People said, that's a real long shot, Sam. And beating back this proposal with all the force that it has aligned in front of it is a long shot. But we are going to make sure that we are heard, and that to the extent they want to do this ugly thing, they're going to be accountable for it. They're not going to be able to do this and say the public loved it and everybody was all song and dance. And I'm not suggesting we lose, and I'm not throwing in the towel, but I'm gonna, along with my colleagues, continue to fight this. And if we don't win this battle either entirely or we lose parts of it, we're gonna keep going, because this is the greatest city in the world. And as Richard was saying, people should not be accepting. And the people Lynn was saying before, beginning to pay. Why? Pay for what? I mean, there's no reason to do that.
Okay, great. One last question from that came in earlier from Steve Friedman. In retrospect, what could have been done to save Penn Station? I had always heard that Mayor Wagner wanted it saved, but his hands were tied. I don't remember the details of how, but the state intervened to save Radio City Music Hall. So does anybody know anything about that? The saving of Radio City Music Hall from the wrecking ball?
Yes, Radio City was saved. It wasn't going to come down. It was going to have a tower built over it and destroy a lot of the interior. There was a lieutenant governor at the time named Mary Ann Krupsak, who didn't get much attention and nobody really thought much of her, but she did intervene, and the whole idea of the tower over Radio City got a lot of opposition, total opposition from the public, and she aided the cause from Albany.
Ah, thank you.
I wrote about it. That's how I know.
Helps to have the historical perspectives.
Can I give you another? Can I give you another historical perspective? So I was born in Manhattan, lived here my entire life, and for 2/3 of my life, I've lived almost next to the High Line, which for a zillion years, and for those who don't know, the city, the state were trying to tear it down because that land, oh gosh, it's a longer story behind why this happened, why this land suddenly turned fallow in terms of what it was being used for, which was as massive manufacturing for this new place called New York City that was doubling in size every year or every 10 years, something like that, back in the 19th century. And they built these giant factories, and these factories needed transportation. And so they eventually built the High Line. And this system was so brilliantly designed that it made those factories even more efficient, so that not only were they providing to Manhattan, which is what they originally were intended to do, but they were providing to the Northeast. And that it was just greed in the wake of World War II and collusion between the four major companies that we all know the names of, that shut that down. When that shut that down, those factories suddenly couldn't operate at all. And so they went out of town and left these buildings behind that laid fallow for 50 years. It was the least valuable land in Manhattan. And then two artists came along and proposed, and the city spent so much money, or the state spent so much money trying to tear down the High Line, and they went through millions and millions of dollars, and it was so well built, they couldn't do it. And so in the early 2000s, with a donation from, I forget who, but a designer that had her office overlooking the High Line, gave in $1 million to two artists to turn it into an art project. And before they finished, somebody saw the value of that art project and bought the land on both sides of it and built the Standard Hotel over their art project.
Right.
All of a sudden,
I just want to jump in and say,
Well,
And
I just wanted,
it's-
just for those who don't know, that turned in the tumble of that dice, turned that land from the least valuable in Manhattan to the most valuable in the world.
Yeah.
There's an earlier story to that. That's not complete
Yes,
at all.
but it's not, no, it wasn't complete. No.
But I just want to wrap up here by saying, and I'll turn it back to Ann here in a moment, but as disheartening as things are and have been in this city in terms of development and the loss of precious historic resources, etc., displacement, you name it, there is always hope. If you look back through the records and the history of how fights have played out in the city, there have been moments when people who come together as a grassroots group in the face of insane odds, they have managed sometimes to pluck victory from the mouths of absolute defeat. Do not forget that. I really remind all of us tonight, because sometimes I fall into that trap too of thinking, this is insane. This is a juggernaut of power and money and influence that I, as one human being, cannot do anything about. That is not true. And you are not alone. We are here together tonight, and there is a way. Keep fighting, get out there, go to those meetings, be that person who will not let them go without some kind of reminder that this is a huge loss to the city if they let it go. Go to Community Board 5, go to Community Board 4, go to the Empire State Development Corporation, call Kathy Hochul. Do what you have to do. Get your city council member to hold a hearing on some aspect of this monstrosity. You can create space in the civic forum that gets people's attention focused on this. Do it. Go out there and do it. That is my challenge to you. And I know the crew here tonight would agree. So please go get it. And Ann, back to you.
Brad, great words. That was wonderful. I would just add to that, Brad Hoylman, Dick Gottfried, and Jerry Nadler, because those are three other politicians who are also involved in this mix. And that was perfect. That's exactly what we need. We just need to get involved, and we need to let our voice be heard. And we just need to say, no, we're not going to take this. You're not going to destroy an entire swath of Midtown and, put more glass and steel. I'll just end on this. Just go to the corner of 14th Street and 6th Avenue and look at what they built. And that is what our city is going to turn into if we don't get involved. It's just nothing but glass, and it's awful. Anybody else want to say anything else? And then that's it, we're done.
I usually close, so it's my birthday.
Yes,
and
Sam. It's your birthday.
You're taking honor. I'm not going to sing when I'm 64, but in any event, look, I'll just follow on what Brad said. I love art, architecture, music, etc. And Pete Seeger, who was such a great American and fought so many battles and won many of them and lost some of them. He had a great song, Quite Early Morning. And, the lead to the chorus was It's Always Darkest Before the Dawn. I actually saw him sing that at Bryant Park the year before he died, which was a highlight in life for me. And I would say that to all of you, it's always darkest before the dawn. Brad is absolutely right. People win these things. You have people like Roberta on or Peter on, who've been involved in so many important efforts that we're all benefiting from today. And while the old goats like me at 64 are benefiting from them, people like Andrew and Chazar and Ben Hansen, who's working the chat and Q&A with Ann, we got some people that are much younger than us getting engaged and involved. And so let's have fun and really put up a great fight, and let's win. So thank you, everybody. And I really appreciate your participation, and we will get out all these different links, and I'm sure we'll be in touch. So thank you very much. And thanks, Ann, for doing a great job hosting, and thanks to all the Alliance members for everything you do.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Brad, for
everybody.
being a special
And
guest.
happy
Thank
birthday,
you, Peter.
Sam.
Happy
Thank you.
birthday.
Happy birthday. Great job, everyone.
All right, and we'll send out the emails. And
More
Ben,
soon.
of course, Ben. Thank you, Ben. All right, everybody. Have a good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Take
Bye.
Good
care.
night, everybody.
Bye.